Well, good morning. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us. This is another in my senior nutrition series. This is not a quick and easy meal. This is one where you can prepare something for many, many other meals. This is my potato topper. I had my kids over for dinner and cooked a nice roast beef and had a lot of roast beef left. So the next day, I made these potato toppers, and they are so good, and I put about 6 portions in the freezer. So don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you like our videos, and click on the little bell icon when you subscribe, and you'll get a notice when I post new videos. Now let's get cooking. So I have here 2 potatoes. You rarely see me cook potatoes, because an 8-ounce portion of baked potato has about 22 net grams of carbs. But I do eat one occasionally. And I'm going to do them without foil, and I will tell you why in just a second. I have a little bit of melted butter here, and I'm going to take these well-washed, scrubbed potatoes and brush them in butter, and then I'm going to sprinkle a generous portion of kosher salt all over them. And this is going to make a nice, fluffy, dry inside potato. Now, health issue, safety issue, foil. It's rare, but a foil-wrapped potato can develop botulism if not maintained at the proper temperature. Is it likely? No. Is it rare? Yes. Is it possible? Because it has happened. Yes. And I will put a link for you in the info section. And if it's very important to you to continue to wrap your potatoes in foil, go ahead. Just be sure you serve them immediately. And if you're not going to serve them immediately while they're very hot, open the foil. The case that I'm going to post for you was in a restaurant. If you ever go to a restaurant and you get a foil-wrapped potato and it's not piping hot, don't eat it. Send it back. Get something else. Because it can be, rarely, but can be unsafe. And anyway, I just think potatoes cooked this way are so much better. So I have preheated my oven to 425. These will cook in an hour, and I'll test them. A bigger potato would be an additional 15 to 20 minutes, just depending on the size. I'll be back. This potato topper is going to start out with caramelized onions. So I have 2 onions cleaned and ready to slice. And for caramelizing onions, you do what they call a French cut. And I usually do a modified French cut, but I'm going to show you a French cut. If you see, I'm cutting it at an angle and cutting it fairly thin. Your knife must be very sharp. This is the recommended cut for French onion soup, which many people argue is named for the style of cut of the onion rather than the country of origin. And as I'm cutting, I am reminded again that we're in no hurry. I used to just chop, 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 chop and be done. I take a little more time now because I don't want to get cut, and my hands are not as sturdy as they once were. So when you get close to your fingers, you want to wrap them back a little bit. And when you get close to the edge, when it gets very close to your fingers, you'll flip the onion to get a little bit more stability as you cut. So we're going to cut up 2 onions in this manner. And then we're going to caramelize these. I might cook them a little less than full caramelization, but I'll show you the process. A lot of people ask about that, so I thought I'd take the time. This is a whole stick of butter, a half cup, and I took out just enough of that stick to brush those potatoes. And you separate these onions and put them into a warm, not a hot skillet, and I always use my cast iron skillet. This is my Field cast iron skillet. And you just want to kind of break those up a little bit, and they'll break up more as we cut them. Now, the process of caramelizing onions is a long one. And yes, this is kosher salt, by the way. You can cook the onions without caramelizing them. You get a little bit more sweetness and flavor if you take the extra time. And I told you at the beginning, this is not a quick dish. This is going to take about 30 minutes to caramelize these. And why so long? You do it slowly. When people ask about how to caramelize onions, I see many people comment, add sugar. Don't add sugar to caramelized onions. The whole purpose of doing them is that onions have their own sweetness. And what you're doing is cooking them slowly to coax that natural sugar out. And that's what caramelizes. If you're having to add sugar to get the sweetness, you're not cooking them long enough, and you're cooking them too fast. So they're coated with the butter and salt. They're on a medium-low heat. I'm going to cover them, and I'll check back on them every 5 minutes. And we're going to do some time lapse here, and I'll show you. This is after about 5 minutes. They're starting to wilt, but remember, I have them on a very low heat. I'm just going to cook these until they get a golden color, and I'll show you the progression. If you were doing this for French onion soup, you would cook them until they are totally brown and they totally fall apart. So I'm cooking these just a little less than that. And I'll finish them without the lid. The lid was just until they wilted. Now I want the liquid to cook off. This is another 5 minutes, and you see they're bubbling nicely. They're still on a medium to low heat. I'm going to add a little garlic at this point, just for the flavor for this particular dish. You might not do that if you're making French onion soup. And if you see any of these, it's important to stir it about every 5 minutes. And if you see any little brown edges, turn your heat down. You don't want little brown edges. What you want is for the whole thing to have a consistent golden color. And by the way, I added the garlic later because if you add the garlic too early, it can take on a bitter taste. So about halfway through, I put in about a half teaspoonful of garlic. I'm using the minced garlic from the grocery store. It comes in a little jar. Now, we're not done cooking the onions yet, but for this dish, I am adding some sliced red peppers. And for the last few minutes of cooking the onions, I'm going to cook those peppers with it. And I did not list, you can see though that my onions are getting a golden color. I did not list all the ingredients at the beginning of this. Sorry, I have company. I was in a little bit of a hurry, but I will list all the ingredients in the info section. These are close to done. So now is the time to add any spices. See that nice golden color on those onions? As I say, if you're making French onion soup, you'll cook them a stage even further, and they will be almost cooked to mush and a deep, rich color, almost like coffee with cream. Now I'm going to make a brown gravy. You can see my onions are a nice golden color. I've got a half cup of flour here. And yes, we're having more carbs than normal in this dish. And you can do this with Carb Quick. But I'm using flour, which most people will use. So a half cup of flour. So now I'm just going to stir this around. Sort of coat all the onions and peppers in that flour and cook it long enough for the flour to brown. And to do that, I'm going to do it slowly, and you want to keep it from sticking, but you want this flour to cook away. You want to cook it long enough to cook away all the pasty flavor, and to get a little brownness. Now, if you're not confident doing it this way, you can make the gravy part separate and then put them together after the gravy is made. But I really like the flavor you get from browning. I'm going to add a little bit more oil because it's starting to stick. That was probably a tablespoonful of oil. And you may have to do that to keep it from scorching. You don't want it to scorch. That's why I'm stirring it regularly as I go. And I probably need to get a spatula here so that I can scrape it up from the bottom like that. And letting it cook like this, giving it that extra time to cook and brown a little bit, adds to the color of your dish, but it also adds to the flavor. If you add your broth now too soon and you don't let this brown, then the flavor is, it's good, but it's better if you do it this way. So we're going to stir those around. You see I added just a little bit more oil. I'm showing you this whole process, by the way, just so you see about how long it takes and how it looks. And you see the brownness growing. We're building the flavor as we go. And that's about brown enough. We're going to make gravy, and I'm starting with 2 cups of broth, but I may add another up to a cup depending on the thickness of broth here, beef broth. And you can use chicken broth because the flavor and the color come from the browning. So you can use vegetable broth if you'd rather, but I've measured out 2 cups of broth. I'm just going to put it in the little well I made in the middle and stir, 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 whisk, whisk, whisk. And you see we're making a brown gravy. What we made earlier was a roux with the vegetables in it, the onions and peppers. You can, by the way, add carrots and celery if you like, but it's not necessary. And we'll just stir as we go. If you use room temperature or colder broth, then you don't have to worry about any lumps. They'll just stir right out. That's the old rule. Cold roux, hot broth. Hot roux, cold broth. And then no lumps. So I've let this cook until it's pretty thick because we want this to stay on a potato. And I'm adding some leftover roast beef that I've sliced pretty thinly. And I don't know exactly how much this is. That's up to you. Let me just say 2 cups. And you can do this same dish with chicken if you have leftover roast chicken. Or turkey the day after Thanksgiving. And you don't even have to have a potato. You can put this over toast. You can put this over a biscuit. It's a topper. And it can top most anything. I'm adding more broth to get the right thickness. I want it to be thick enough to stand up on the potato, but I want there to be enough gravy to go down in the potato. Your normal proportions for a 1/2 cup flour would have been 4 cups of broth, but I don't want it that thin, so I've used less. And then I'm going to add some peas and carrots, and you don't have to add the peas and carrots. But when your doctor says, are you getting plenty of servings of vegetables and fruits? You can say, yes, I did. I put some peas and carrots in my potato topper. Here's a little hint for you. Add some more broth, let it cook a little bit more, pour it between 2 crusts. Pour it on a crust and then top it and bake it. And you have a beef pot pie, a really good beef pot pie. And I think pot pies were invented for that purpose, to use up leftovers. And they're so wonderful. So we're just going to let that simmer a little and give it a little taste for salt. And if you want to make it spicier, some thyme, dried thyme, some parsley flakes, even some Italian seasoning. Any of those, if you want them. But the time you took to caramelize the onions at the beginning is your flavor base. This is done. I'll see you at the table. So here is one of our potatoes, and the way I test them is with an oven mitt. I make sure that they're soft and go in easily. You can also stick a fork right into the middle. If you meet any resistance, they're not done. Now I cut my potatoes with a fork just because it makes them a little fluffier inside. It makes a little bit better presentation. And then I push them in from the outside, and I want you to look at the flakiness of that potato. This is just my favorite way to bake potatoes. They are just perfect inside. And add the topper and some sliced tomatoes on the side, and your potato is dressed for dinner. I made 2 of these, and I have 6 portions to go in the freezer to serve later. But right now I'm going to dig into this one. You know, later I might serve that over mashed cauliflower to make it a nice low-carb meal. And I'm having trouble figuring the cost of this meal because it was almost nothing. The tomato cost more than the potato topper. And the original beef was from a whole eye of round, about 6 pounds, that I bought for $12. I served 7 people for dinner, and I had enough left for 6 servings of this potato topper. So that was an economical meal, plus it's so good. It's so delicious, and it is very nutritious. Try this next time you have leftover meat, chicken, turkey, beef. I hope you do, and I hope you love it. And thank you for joining us on Debbie's Back Porch. See you tomorrow.